Hi, good evening. Can everybody hear me? Can you just type in a yes and let me know if my voice is clear to you? Great. I got a thumbs up. Thank you so much. Welcome, Ishraji. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Great, guys. Really very excited to see each one of you here. And yeah, I just wanted to know, would be great to know if you guys uh, would be great to know if you guys tell me where you're joining from and if you've had some experience of growing plants before. It could be ornamental, it could be normal vegetables. Great. So Bilbo is from Delhi. A lot of people from Delhi. Great. Okay, we have Archana from Bangalore, Reenu from Pune, Vaishnavi from Hyderabad, and Alkaji from Gurgaon. Great. I'm so glad to see each one of you. Really, really excited. Aditya, okay. Aarti, okay. Great to know you have a terrace. Nice, nice. So a lot of people. Oh, there's somebody from Kollam also, Kerala. Lovely. So we're actually reaching out to everybody across India. Nice to know. Great. So, how many of us here feel that growing plants during these stressful times have been boon, a therapy? Oh, Pooja Saluja is into balcony makeovers. That's lovely, interesting. Absolutely okay. Bilbo says he's been loving it. He or she, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm assuming it's a he. Vaishnavi, yes, I hear you. Great, great. So I think depending on it, actually, I completely agree with you, Alkaji. I think that's one thing that's keeping me also sane. Okay, and because we are paying so much attention, our backyards and our lawns or our balconies are blooming so much. That's very true. And I think sight of a flower really makes us, very happy. And so, irrespective whether you're a beginner or you already have tons of experience, I think it's gonna be a really enriching experience for me as well as for you. I hope I'm visible to everybody and audible clearly. Just checking once more before I start off with the presentation.
Yeah, we
And
can be.
okay, cool. Uh, Going ahead, just very quickly, just taking you through some basics of this webinar. It's 1.5 hours long. We'll have question and answers for about 15 minutes in the end. Yeah, please use the chat box to post your questions. While I'm presenting, it will be very difficult for me to see your comments. So I will wait on till the Q&A round to answer your questions. There is some bit of a time lag between you typing your questions and me reading those. So please be patient. And yes, we are at the mercy of the internet. So if there are any network issues from my end, I'll obviously connect back and start off from where I left. If it's in your case, if you find any error with audio or video, please do check your connection. And last but not the least, the screen of this Google Meet, sometimes the screen of the presentation can be slightly small in size. So you can actually change the layout and choose spotlight so that you have a bigger slide to view. Yeah. Uh,
And can I request other participants to kind of switch off their video so that the bandwidth gets.
okay. Yeah. So guys, would request everyone to put their screen or videos, shut down your videos if possible. A little bit about me. I think this meme pretty much explains who I am and what I am as a person, I really, of course, love plants, and I have been always in awe of nature. And simply because of that, I think permaculture just made sense to me. It was a natural progression in that sense. And a permaculture typically teaches you how to apply Earth's logic while growing your own food. And this presentation is exactly that, an observation of nature and how I have applied it, my own experiences and learnings. And I really hope that at the end of this presentation, you'll be able to take out maybe one key thing and apply it in your growing spaces. Yeah, so moving on to, and definitely not a feeling of power, but definitely feeling of contentment is something that I get. Uh, a little bit about the topics of discussion very quickly. I will be talking about laws of nature, something that we really depend upon. You know, how the ecosystem works, how the natural balance is established. And this will give us a sense of how life exists on Earth. The learnings from this section will be applied onto the next section, which is applying nature's logic. Yeah, and in this section, we will talk in detail about the requirements for growing abundant food. And the third one is, a step-by-step guide of designing a wildlife-friendly garden. So I'll be putting in 1, 2 together to design a sample wildlife garden and certain key elements, and we'll try to wrap this up within 1.5 hours. Cool. So all in, and we shall now begin. Great. Starting off with number one fact of nature: plants do not exist alone. Yeah, something that we already know. A plant always exists with other plants and other organisms, which are the living things, as well as its physical environment, which is the non-living constituent. And these living and non-living things coexist in something called an ecosystem. Yeah, this is how nature exists. This is how everything is set in motion. Yeah. Now, something which is very important, and I want a key takeaway of this slide and which will be applicable throughout this presentation, is this living and non-living things are connected together by two forces or two flows. Number one, energy, and number two, nutrients. And this whole presentation is actually based on this basic fact. Yeah, we have to remember this fact and apply it wherever we are growing our own foods. So when I talk about cycling of energy and cycling of nutrients, let me just give you an example. This tree here that you see, yeah, let me take that as an example. The sunlight, which is the major source of energy, radiant energy for Earth, reaches the tree. The tree makes its own food, grows flowers and fruits. And when those flowers and fruits drop down onto the ground, they decompose. Yeah. So the energy from the sun got transferred to that of the tree. From the tree, it moved to the soil. And from the soil, it again went back to the tree through its roots. So the energy is actually getting transmitted from one element to the other. Together with that, you'll also see a nutrient flow. That is, from this tree, the flowers and the fruits of the tree are the nutrients. They either fall down and feed the organisms on the soil, which actually ultimately decompose it. So the nutrients are going into the soil. Or let's say a monkey comes around and plucks the fruit of this tree, eats half of it, throws the rest. Maybe the seed blooms into another tree, but the fruit that it's eaten comes out through his feces, again decomposes and becomes part of the soil, right? So this whole circle of life, as if I were to put it that way, continues on and on in nature. And this is something that we actually have to keep in mind. And when I'm talking about this whole cyclic process, it exists with the help of three key categories. Producers, which I mentioned were the plants and trees. Consumers that depend on the plants or on subsequent animals that come in between. And when those animals die, they decompose and again form a supply to those producers, which we term as plants, for example. And this is very much applicable in case of a food chain. Yeah? All of us have seen food chain in some part of our lives during while we were studying earlier, or while teaching our kids perhaps. So this so grass is a producer which is supporting a grasshopper. Grasshopper is eaten by a bird, and so on and so forth. It reaches an apex predator, which is here in this case an owl. When the owl dies, it decomposes again, forms a part of the soil, the nutrients and energy supplied to the producers. So this is the natural balance that has been established by Earth. Now it's important to note that one level will supply to the next level. So here, for example, grasshoppers are a food supply to the birds, and therefore there need to be enough grasshoppers to form food for the birds, enough birds to form food for the snakes, and so on and so forth. That would mean that every animal at each level need to have a certain amount, needs to thrive, needs to flourish. Yeah. And how can any living organism flourish? When it has environmental conditions which are favorable, and those environmental conditions are in a place that's called home. Yeah. For in this ecosystem language, we can call it a habitat, wherein for an animal that would mean he has shelter, food, a mate to reproduce with, and for a plant it would mean light, air, water, and soil. Yeah, and a habitat is actually a very large geographical area. But what is extremely important for us to learn from a habitat is that it's not only a large geographical area, but it is also present in a microform called a microclimate, or a microhabitat, I'm sorry. So microhabitat here would mean an immediate surrounding of an organism. So let me give you an example. Yeah, in a forest, when a tree falls, dies and falls, the moment it falls, the whatever water vapor is there in the air, it condenses and starts accumulating under the tree, under the log, right? When it accumulates, it invites fungus. The fungus starts growing and it starts eating away the wood, and a moss starts appearing on top of the wood. Because it's moist and damp and nice, small insects and earthworms and all these creepy crawlies start appearing, millipedes, centipedes. It can even go up to a level of a salamander, which is a reptile or an amphibian. Yeah. So it is what's happening here is that it was just a log of wood that fell onto the forest floor, but it created a microhabitat of for all these organisms to find place, shelter, food, and they thrive. So this is something that we need to apply when we are planning to grow our own plants. Yeah, planning to grow our own food, whether it's in a balcony, on a terrace, or on ground. Yeah, and I'll just share with you one video of a microhabitat that happens to be in my backyard. Yeah, just a minute. So did you see that thick earthworm making its way through that soil? Yeah, just to kind of give you a yes, yes, there are a lot of birds in my backyard. So yes, this earthworm, just to give you a backstory of this particular video. I moved into this place about a year back, and I've been working on this soil for about 6-8 months. When I moved in, my backyard was a dump yard of construction. There was cement, there was tires, wires, broken tiles, sanitary ware, even trouser of a laborer. I don't know, I'm hoping he was a laborer. But everything and anything. It was, and all of this within 1.5 feet under the topsoil. So it was absolutely not a place for any of these organisms to find place. However, when you work on soil, when you understand this whole logic of creating the kind of home all of these organisms require and plants thrive, these organisms just make an appearance. Yeah, so we need to really understand that, and nature just appears on its own. You don't really have to work that hard. It'll find a way. And I this brick I had kept in April, yeah, just to make some steps to make my way through the yard. Within 2 months, to be able to see such a thick earthworm, it to me seems like a big achievement. In fact, this picture here is that of my very small guava tree. It's about 5 feet, and I planted it about 8 months ago. A tailor bird decided to build its nest there. Perhaps because it thought that it made perfect sense for her to find this place as a secure place to raise her young ones. Yeah, so all of these things I've been able to put together within 6 to 8 months of moving into a new place, and I'm sure that the slides as we move forward will be able to give you certain inputs and tools to work with, and also an approach to work with while you are creating a biodiverse garden. Yeah. So just to summarize, when you take care of your plants as well as the organisms, you are also creating a habitat for each of those. And when you create a habitat, they thrive. It's more stable, it's beneficial, and it's abundant. And that is what we call nature's logic. Yeah. That's how nature is meant to be. That's how Earth is meant to be. Now, at this point, I want to ask all you guys a small question. If you were to apply nature's logic in growing your own food, what would be the results? Yeah, if you apply nature's logic, make it biodiverse, and make a micro abundance. Ania Gulati says abundance. Great. What do you mean by abundance, Ania? It would thrive. Yes, Vivek. Sustainable. Great. Yes. No harmful pesticides. Yes. Yes. We become more conscious. We don't want to hurt the plants and animals. Resilient. Wow, that's a lovely word, Nandini. Organic. True. Create a natural habitat. Yes. Self-sufficient. Absolutely. Absolutely. Organic farming, Sangeeta Bansal. Got it. Yes. Other than abundance, what else do you think can be a positive environment? Definitely, yes. It soothes your mind. It makes you feel alive. Makes you feel happy. Thanks, Shashi. Pragati, less guilt of harming the environment. True. That's absolutely true. Birds and bees. Yes, Miss Kiran Nath. And balanced and more oxygen. Lovely, lovely. Better soil as a result and diverse. Of course, great. I think I should shut my presentation right now. Self-sustained farm, true. So all of that is absolutely true, and I will try to. I'll just take you through to the next slide, that kind of summarizes all elements serving each other. Thank you, Ms. Sangeeta Bansal. Yes, harmonious world. Uh, um, this list here should be able to somewhat talk of a lot of things, a lot of answers that you guys gave. A healthy plants, resilient, abundant food, biodiversity, lots of plants and animals. There will be pest and disease management also. Yeah, when we say that we'll not be harming anyone using pesticides, that would mean that we are taking care of it naturally, and all our elements are harmoniously, balanced. You were also producing more oxygen. Somebody gave that answer, and surrounding temperature goes down. Yes. So I am really curious to know. Somebody mentioned resilience, badly needed in Delhi. Of course, Mr. Sumit Joshi. So when we talk about resilient plants, can somebody explain what you mean by resilient plants, or like some idea about what is resilience? Great, Adityaman. Yes, making ponds and storing water. So basically conserving water. Yes, but do you do? What do you mean by resilient? Would anybody want to give that a shot? Yes, yes. Ability to withstand weather changes, pests. Great, great, Nandini. Yes, yes. So when we talk of resilient plants or resilient plants, particularly, I'm talking about also the native plants which naturally occur in a particular area. Yeah, these plants are meant to be in that location because they are well adapted to that, and they also support indigenous plant animals. Let's call it plants and animals, but yes, organisms. They will attract indigenous bees, birds. The pests will keep at bay accordingly, and you will therefore have a harmonious cycle going in. So I think that's an awesome. Yes, no pesticides, hence healthy and naturally organic. Thank you, Jiten. That was a lovely answer. Thank you so much. Now these are the results, and we all know that when we apply nature's logic, when everything is in harmony, we are going to get abundance in all forms. Yeah, but what are the requirements to get this? Let me just take you through those requirements very quickly here, and we'll detail it out in other slides. First, a healthy soil. We start off with healthy soils. Plant needs soils. Organisms are also around the plant, so soil becomes your starting point. You have to focus on getting a very good soil. Second, vegetation or planting for that matter. Yeah, how are you planting it? Whether you are layering your planting, whether you're taking care of colors and smells, how are they going to help you make a garden which is resilient, a garden which is sustainable and organic. Yeah. And third element is the wildlife element that if we introduce in our gardens, it increases the biodiversity many folds. Yeah, and there are small things that we can do in terms of including that wildlife element into our gardens, and we'll be talking more about that. Yeah, so I'll start off with soil first. Yeah, and again a question for you guys. Are we ready? Okay, question to you is, imagine that you are going into a forest and you pick up a handful of soil. Yeah, you bend down, you pick up a handful of soil. How would you describe that soil? Right now talking about soil. Leafy, lovely, porous, nice. Porous meaning fluffy, yeah, brown in color, somewhat black, sandy, okay, moist, water retention, full of life, dry leaves, porous, yeah, light, rich, moist, airy, moving with organisms, yes, Nandini, earthy smell, lovely, origin of life, with dry and parched depending on which forest you are, yes, of course, Deepti. Lots of texture, lovely, full of nutrients, full of carbon, moist and warm. Great Sanayaka Roop. That's carbon for anybody who finds that a difficult term. Carbon is anything that is brown and natural. I would call it natural for this benefit of this presentation, but yes, anything which is brown like dry leaves, mostly which are found in forest, would be called carbon. Yes, dark in color. So yes, so all of that, and there are worms, and of course it's black gold. And I have your answers here. Yes, it is dark, it is covered with grasses, it's moist, it smells like rain. Yeah, and somebody said it's porous. Porous meaning it can absorb water, there is air in it, it's fluffy. Yeah, and we all can very well distinguish between what is a poor soil and what is a good soil. It is definitely dark in color because there is a lot of what should I say? A lot of organic matter. Mycelium, Sumit, is start of a mushroom that you see, the wild mushrooms that grow on the forest soil. Because it's so damp and moist and warm and humid and lovely, lots of humus. Yes, Aditya. So all of this is a result of those leaves falling onto the ground and those organisms working on it. So just quickly moving ahead, soil, like we all know, is full of millions and millions of microbes, which are creating a symbiotic ecosystem now within the soil. We are talking of ecosystem earlier of the world, yeah, geography. Now let's go down to the soil level and see this ecosystem that exists right under our feet. It's amazing. It's full of microbes. It's outstandingly biodiverse. Yeah, within a forest. It has organic matter, which is humus, minerals, moisture, and air. Yeah. Now, usually soil is made up of these three components: sand, silt, and clay. The percentage of these three components define the porosity. So many people said it's porous, some people said it's dry and parched. Really, it depends on what kind of forest you are in. If you're in a desert forest, yes, it will be dry and parched. If you're in a temperate or rainforest, it will be completely dark, damp, and the proportions will also vary accordingly. Yes. The biggest thing that soil gives us, and when we are talking about growing plants, growing food for ourselves, it's an attractor for life. And I go back to where I started, that this whole cycle of nutrients and energy, it's all coming back to soil. Yeah, it all comes back to soil. So it is an attractor for life, providing nutrients and moisture to plants and getting organic matter in return, which it again decomposes with the help of microbes and other soil organisms, not really microbes. Yeah. So that is what is soil. Now, how can you make your garden soil sing like that of a forest soil? Number one, mulching. This is my favorite activity. I cover whatever, and this picture has been taken from my backyard. I make sure that not a single speck of the soil surface is visible. Yeah, I cover it with all kinds of brown leaves, grass clippings, straw, hay, anything that I can get my hands on. Yeah, right here in Gurgaon. And I make sure that happens because there are a lot of benefits. Like we mentioned, if we want the soil to be like a forest soil, we adding leaves, that's mulching. Right, Shashi. So adding leaves on top, making a layer. There are various ways of doing mulching. I particularly like organic mulching, and this is this form of mulching where you spread the leaves out is the easiest and it's the most helpful. So I make sure not one part of the soil is visible to the sun, because sun hits the ground, it heats it up, it will make it difficult for microorganisms and soil organisms to work with the soil to make it porous, right? We talked about porosity, we talked about so many other things. Yeah, it retains moisture, it also prevents compaction. You know, just when we were talking about forest soil, many people said it's fluffy, it has air in it. It is there because all those leaves are not allowing the soil to get compact. Yeah, we want the same here with us, and hence this. And also it controls weeds to a certain extent. I'm not saying that weeds will just not occur. After a few months, yes, few weeds will pop up, and those you can manage easily. But it definitely helps you manage weeds. Another interesting way of and yeah, one more, I just wanted to draw your attention here. When we say it retains moisture, I did a small test in my backyard. Do you see the color difference between in this picture, the one under the green leafy plants and the one, yeah, you can see the drastic difference. That is because of mulching. I didn't water. This picture was taken in June, and I didn't water for 3 days. At the end of the third day, I took this picture. Those plants don't seem to have suffered anything in that hot, dry weather of Delhi, NCR, and look at the amount of moisture it has retained. So yes, mulching makes all the difference, especially if you have soil that is unable to hold moisture and you have a dry weather, windy, dry weather. Yeah. Moving on to another method of having a healthy soil, and I recommend this strongly to everyone. Please compost your kitchen waste and garden waste. A very simple, I'm not getting into details of composting, but few key points I just want to mention. I just want to mention is browns. You have browns, which is your dry leaves, hay, grass clippings from your lawn, anything which is brown in color dried, that forms one part. Another part are the greens, which are your kitchen waste or your garden waste, leaves, green, whatever kitchen scraps you have. And you mix those up. Now the proportion of brown and green is important. Your browns have to be at least 60 to 70%, not more than 70%. Yeah, if you have, let's say, a kilo, 70 75% of that kilo needs to be browns and 25% or 70-30, or even 65-35. Those are the ratios you want to play with. And you mix it up in such a way that there is enough air in it, and therefore when it's aerobic, it doesn't smell, it doesn't rot. So mostly people come up with complaints of it's rotting, there are worms. Those worms will appear every time your compost goes anaerobic meaning without oxygen. So it will start rotting, it will not, eventually it will become part of the soil, but you don't want a messy affair. Also, when it becomes anaerobic, it attracts a lot of pathogens. TB, Clostridium, anthrax, all these are pathogens that thrive in anaerobic environments. So you wouldn't want that to happen. So keep your compost aerobic as much as possible, because when it's aerobic, those methane emissions would not reach the landfills, and that's the Faridabad landfill where our garbage gets dumped. So more and more people composting would mean our kitchen waste and garden waste is not reaching there. Yes, and there are, of course, a lot of benefits of composting. Number one being fertilizer, and I think most of us know what compost really does to the plant, but it's really, really helpful. So that's pretty much about compost. I just want to show you a video of compost pit in my backyard. The reason I'm showing you this video is, how these soil organisms love to stay in compost.
अंदर की तो पूरी मिट्टी बन गई है.
Yeah, so these soil organisms just love to stay or find home and decompose and be there in this in the compost pits or the compost that you might have. You can do, if you're creating a compost pit on ground, try to keep it 3 feet by 3 feet sort of size. It's just more helpful to turn it to keep it aerobic. And if you're trying to do composting in your balconies or terrace, then you can perhaps start with those 20-liter buckets that you have, and you can poke holes in the bucket. And once you poke holes, ensure that the bucket has a lid on top. And when you poke holes underneath the bucket and fill it with your browns and greens, underneath the bucket, put a small plate. It could be that terracotta plates or the that is used to make pots. Cover that plate with some sort of browns or sawdust or anything that can absorb the leachate that will come out of that bucket. Yeah, so make holes on all sides of the bucket, the sides, the bottom. Keep the lid, which does not have too many. The lid should be solid, and then a small flat plate underneath to catch the leachate. Have 3 such buckets. By the time you fill in the third bucket with your kitchen waste, your first bucket would be ready. So if this greens and browns percentage is well managed. If it is too dry, the decomposition will not happen. If it is too wet, it will start rotting. So you have to find that balance. Moving on to our next segment, which is vegetation. I again want to post a question to you guys. When we enter a forest, and I will keep coming back to forest because that's the way permaculture is. It makes you see nature around you. When you enter a forest and when you look at the trees, and right now we're talking about vegetation, can you tell me what comes across your mind when you see a forest, when you are in a forest and you're looking at the trees? Beauty, great. Peace, yes. Oh, peace, greens, yes. Yes, true. It's very, very peaceful. Greens, greenery, freshness, yes. Fresh air, yes. Wildflowers, there are no unhealthy plants. Interesting, yes. It's all in balance. Nature in raw form. Yeah, nature as it is. Layering, lovely Rupesh. I like when people tell me what the next slide is all about. Wildlife like birds, yes. Yes, that's true. So it's biodiverse. Coolness. Different types and heights of trees. Sushil, great. Heights of trees, birds chirping. So it's very peaceful, calm, relaxing. It's lovely. Yeah, and of course, because we're talking of vegetation particularly, and I think I saw Rupesh talking about layering and Sangeeta ji talking about heights of trees. So yes, there are different types of trees and different heights of trees. So Sheil has mentioned it here. It is true. There is layering. Yeah, nature does not have everything in order. Everything is as per their requirement and as per their environment, and they are adapting, and it's layered. There is a big tree, then there is a small tree, then there is shrub, and then there is this ground layer. Yeah, there are this layering that's happening, and it is biodiverse, highly biodiverse, both in terms of plants as well as animals. That's why you see so many kinds of birds. That's why we feel the air is so fresh. That's why there is that coolness. Because everybody is trying to balance out everything and make it a quiet and peaceful, lovely place that it is. They grow in response to sunlight, which is available, and they adapt. Butterflies, yes. Trees adapting to the sun, absolutely. So they adapt. They adapt to the environment. And what is also interesting to note here is this layering. And if you see this triangle here that I've made to see, this layering is happening not only above the ground, it's happening below the ground as well. Do you see? Yeah, so when that happens, when that layering is happening above ground and below ground, there is no competition, or competition is minimized. And trees are adapting to each other. They're adapting to how they want to thrive, how they want to flower, how, everything is in harmony. Now, this is one key learning that I would want to take away from a forest. Yes, and apply it into our gardens. Point number 1 being layered planting. Yeah, layered planting. So when I talk about layered planting, there are various layers in which you can work. And like, for example here, let's talk about the first layer, which is the underground layer. You have all the root vegetables, which grow underground. The bulbs are underground. Your radish, carrot, turnip, even rhizomes. By rhizomes, I mean ginger, turmeric, arbi. All these are growing underneath. Yeah. Second, then comes the ground layer. Ground layer are plants that don't go too high, but they are just quite close to the ground. So it could be your spinach, it could be your methi, it could be mint, it could be coriander. All these, they cover your ground very nicely. Then you have the mid layer. Mid layer would have plants like tomatoes, mustard, marigold coming up, And then after this mid layer, which can also comprise of certain shrubs like your bougainvillea, right? So many other flowering plants, yeah, like even Ratrani. It grows to a nice, good height, yeah. So these all form the shrubs. Then we move on to the next layer of trees, where trees are of different canopies. It could be a very thick canopy tree, or a very huge tree like a jackfruit, a banana tree, which is manageable and tinier as compared to a jackfruit. So depending on the space, you can actually choose what kind of trees are growing. And then, of course, there are creepers and climbers. Creepers are the ones that creep on the floor, like melons, pumpkins. And climbers are beans, like pole beans that wrap around a pole, and go up, like green peas. They like to climb up. So this is the kind of layering I'm talking about. And then we talked about biodiversity. We said it's completely full of, and Aarti Chaudhary is saying, would the same logic of layering apply to container garden? Yes, Aarti, I will answer your question. It will totally apply. Yes, so I was just talking about this diverse section of plants. have your vegetables and flowers and herbs together. Because we just saw in that slide where we're talking about forests, it's highly biodiverse. We all know it, but when we start growing our food, we stop thinking about it. We plant everything in a row, same thing together. We don't think that there can be biodiversity. Why not put in some flowers? Why not put in some herbs? Because when you do that, you're controlling pests, you're managing pests. Yeah, you're also helping pollinators. These bees, the poor things, they spend a lot of energy buzzing around, finding flowers, finding flowers. And if you have a cluster of flowers, make sure that you have a cluster, let's say a cluster of marigold, cluster of petunias, and flowers like that, so that these guys can conserve their energy, do your pollination, have their nectar, and hop from one cluster to the next. So when these pollinators are there, they're taking care of pollinating your vegetables. They're getting their nectar. You're also able to manage your pests. And it's absolutely necessary for you to add native species. And why I say so, like in the beginning, let me just give you an example of a jamun tree. A jamun tree, speaking of Delhi NCR kind of weather where it's hot and dry, it thrives in hot and dry climate. Its seeds don't go dormant. So the moment you eat a jamun, you can immediately drop it on the, like, put it in the soil, and within 15-20 days a sapling will come out. So there, it doesn't go through dormancy. Yeah, these are huge trees, and they can be pruned to a certain height. They can be reduced in height. They act as windbreak. So when you have strong winds blowing through your growing area, wind has a very strong impact on plants. They'll break, they'll bend, they lose their flowers, their fruits. They spend a lot of energy stabilizing themselves. So a lot of energy goes in stabilizing themselves, and so they don't even bear fruits many times. So you need to take care how much of a wind is actually entering your area, and perhaps look for trees or look for vegetation that can help you do that. Yeah. So again, coming to the jamun tree, the flowers of a jamun tree attract indigenous bees, and it makes amazing honey. Yeah, fruits of course are edible. We all know that. Leaves can be given to cattle. So, and I don't even want to talk about the medicinal benefits that a jamun has, but these indigenous trees have grown in our regions or grown in India and the subcontinent. Let's talk about the subcontinent altogether. These are very well adapted and are supportive of indigenous wildlife as well. And we would want all of that coming into our gardens. So there are three things, therefore, we keep in mind while we are planting. We try to layer as much as possible. We bring in a diverse selection of plants, and we add in native species as well. Yeah. Now, I like I mentioned, if you take care of all these three things, this is how your forest garden can look like. This is a reference image that I have taken. So you can see plants of various heights, trees, climbers, all sorts of things, right? This is how nature would have it if it was growing vegetables for itself. Yeah, this is how it would have it. Now, going to the most important question that some of us have asked, how do you do that in a pot? And I hope you appreciate my effort, but I drew this drawing to help you understand how it can be considered being done in a pot. Yeah. So you take maybe a 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet sort of a large pot. I've taken a large pot here. Let's talk about layering. You have this drumstick. This is drumstick, what I've written. Drumstick or moringa. Yeah, it's a tree. It can be very well managed inside a pot. And you can prune it to the height that you want. Yeah, that forms your tallest layer. Yeah. Then comes in your layer of climbers. This is Karela. Yeah. So I've decided to draw Karela. This Karela goes up. It's a climber. It will use its tendrils, coil around the tree, and it's stable there. Then comes the mid layer where you have plants like a tomato. I've given an example of a tomato, but you can have brinjal, you can have chilies. Yeah, they bear flowers. Those flowers will bring in your bees, right? Then comes the ground layer. Ground layer, you can take in, let's say, a small coriander, which will only form the ground layer. You can take into consideration a little bit of basil. Basil is somewhere between ground cover and mid layer. Yeah. You can have the variety which is a tinier in height. In terms of underground, I have ginger growing here, and I have a carrot. Now, when you see on top, there is absolutely no competition, and at the bottom, the roots are also not competing. And this is a way that we can actually start planting pots. Yes, Pudina. Yes, Shashi. So this is something that can be done in while layering these plants in a pot, and this can definitely be considered. Yeah, so that's pretty much it in terms of vegetation. I think those are the key points I wanted to focus on when we talk of vegetation. Moving on to the wildlife element, which we've been, wanting to talk about. Now, wildlife, because as the name suggests, you can't put a leash around it and bring it in. These get attracted to habitats. These get attracted to micro habitats, and we've kind of understood that we need some bit of soil, which is nice and healthy. We need certain sort of layering and planting, and mix and match of smell and colors, flowers and herbs, so that we can add in more biodiversity to attract these organisms. Now, this is the basic requirement for you to grow your own food and also attract wildlife. What else can you do on top of that? A water body. Yeah, this is a small pond that I have in my garden, and it has called in all sorts of wildlife that I could not have seen in my garden in the last 6 months. From birds, bees to dragonflies, frogs and snails are there, can be seen around this time in monsoon. Lizards, all sorts of variety of these organisms are there. They're helping the flowers bloom. There is instant pollination that I can see happening all the time. And because there is this microclimate created because of this water body, I feel and I sense and I know for sure that that area has become cooler. When the wind blows over it, it carries a bit of moisture and brings down the temperature, especially in summer months. So it has been a blessing for me. I've put in a lot of water loving plants around it, so that whatever moisture is there because of the water body, they are also able to absorb that and thrive. So I have put in canna on one side, and I remember somebody had mentioned about these small sunbirds coming in. Sunbirds love canna. Any plant which is tubular. So when you have these tubular, or when you adapt your vegetation according to the microclimate, it will naturally bring in. But yes, constructing a water body, or even buying, let's say, a small flat pot as a small pond, even for your balcony, a 14-inch kind of a pond, you can still grow a small lotus or a water lily in that, and you will still attract bees and dragonflies and those smaller insects, because they also depend on a little bit of water. Yeah, they do sit on those waters, they breathe, they feed. So all of that happens. A water body is definitely very, very essential. Another thing that you can focus on are the feeding sites. Yeah, bird feeders and bird baths can be either purchased, or you can make them on your own. There is something which is very, very interesting, which is here in terms of when I've this picture which says radish flowers. When you plant your vegetables, yes, of course, you eat most of them. Do set aside 1 or 2 vegetables in there so that they can flower and produce seeds. It gives you 2 benefits. 1, you get seeds for your next season, and 2, indigenous bees will come in on their own. I'm not sure whether it's very clearly visible in this picture, but both of these are covered by not less than 30 to 40 indigenous bees. Yeah, and these flowers are actually fragrant. I just got to know in last season when these were flowering. So I intentionally let the radish be, let it flower, let it produce seeds, so that these bees can come in and help get nectar, help pollinate rest of the plants that I had in my garden. Other things that you can do in terms of nesting and feeding is for birds. There are certain trees. I've written down the names of trees. I mentioned about hibiscus and canna. So your smaller birds can come in and get the nectar from there. But neem, mulberry, jamun, flame of forest, these are bushes, some of the bushes that will invite more birds. There are certain plants that invite butterflies as well as bees. And bees, you can have a lot of bees together with all fruit trees as well. And all gourds and melons also attract a lot of bees, during summers. Your mustard, if you have in your balcony, bees are bound to come. Have clusters of mustard. It'll give you mustard greens to have your sarson ka saag, and it will also get your bees to pollinate your garden to get the nectar that they want. It is a big attractor for bees. Yeah, and yes, there are, of course, you can have bee boxes if you intend to get deeper into managing bees. And there is something called an insect hotel. To my mind, I would not go ahead and buy an insect hotel from the market, but I would definitely, if I have extra wood lying in, I would definitely stack it in one corner, because that will give enough space for these insects to find space and breed and stay there, because ultimately they are going to be the workhorses of my garden and help me farm. Yeah, so these are some of the nesting and feeding sites that can be added on top of having a good biodiversity. Pragati, you asked about managing mosquitoes. Well, I feel the guppies and the mollies in the pond definitely help manage mosquitoes. Yes. And there are ways of, can you please elaborate on insect hotel? Rupesh, I feel that insect hotel, okay, let me just give you a very quick answer to this, is that there are insects that are very, very tiny, and they find places like small holes to go in and build their nest and lay their eggs and produce the next generation. So in nature, it happens on their own. Like, for example, they're carpenter ants that feed on wood and they stay inside the wood. So on a log of a tree, they will find a house and just bore in. But because in urban habitats, we don't really have so much of wood in terms of like trees falling on the ground and making an ecosystem. What you can do is and what I do personally is, whenever these society people come to prune the trees, they cut the branches of the trees. So I just pick those branches. Some of them go into my compost, and some of them I just stack on the corner, so that these insects get small spaces to hide themselves and breed and stay happy there. So it's pretty much there. It's pretty much in that space, and you can do a bit of more research into what do you call, how to manage an insect hotel. Renu, I'll take your question perhaps at the end. Yeah, about ants. Just remind me in the end when we take Q&As. Moving on to just like a summary slide or summarizing this whole session here. Again, saying when there is good soil, when there is good vegetation, and when you have wildlife element, I just want to mention here at the last column where I've written biodiversity and food abundance. This bird is called a shikra. It's a bird of prey. And I've not seen bird of prey around my house for a year. She appeared 2 days back. And I did some research. She feeds on garden lizards. These garden lizards are right now feeding on black ants, which are taking nectar from my lobia plants. Lobia, it's called those pole beans. So I have a lot of ants. Just to answer the question that I think Renu asked. Renu, I'm talking about black ants here. So these black ants love nectar. They make a beeline for that. These black ants love nectar, so they are found on my sweet pea, for example. I have enough lizards. Any time of the day I go out, I can see 5 lizards. Like, I can just count them out. So there must be more. These lizards are feeding on those ants. And now this shikra has appeared, and I'm assuming she has appeared because she wants to. She's found some food in my garden. So you can see that within a year there is this start of a food chain that has started happening. Yeah, it takes time. I'm not saying it's completely balanced. I'm not saying that everything is completely in balance. Of course not. But I see the signs, and these signs are very, very encouraging. And that's exactly what I'm going to tell you, that have patience and increase biodiversity, so that you can have this food chain going on. Right. Moving on to our next segment, of course, food abundance. So, moving on to our next segment, I think it's very, very important for us to know how can we use different elements and design our garden. Yeah, I'll just take you through some of the important aspects of it. You might, if you have more questions around it, perhaps we can take it later. But let's just go through this step by step method. So when you're designing a garden, whether it's a balcony, whether it's a corner, whether it's a big yard, yeah, you have to keep certain things in mind. And going by permaculture principles, the number one thing that you need to do is observe. Yeah, you observe natural elements. So when I talk about observing, and how do you observe your natural elements? What are the elements basically you observe? First, you observe sun. Yeah, how's the sun moving? We all of us know that during summers it's too hot, the days are longer. Yeah, so the yard gets more amount of sun. So do I know how the sun's movement is affecting my growing area? During winters, the buildings or the surrounding structures have a longer shadow because the sun is at an angle. So the sunlight is not that intense, it's colder, and it tends to be damper if there is a shadow of any permanent structure. Yeah, so observe how the sun's movement across the year, annual movement affects your growing area. Second, wind. I mentioned about wind. Take care, understand what is the wind direction and what is the intensity with which it comes. Which season do you get maximum wind? Rainfall is important to know. When is the monsoon, how much rain, what is the soil, how much soil is it retaining, all of that, everything combines and comes together. Then of course the temperatures, which we should know. When is the hottest month, when is the coldest month, what can we do, how can we plan keeping those in mind, and some bit of wildlife movement. Yeah, what kind of wildlife do you have around, whether it's squirrels, whether it's birds, whatever that is, just keep a note of these natural elements. Second is observe the man-made elements. Very, very typically talking about an urban landscape, these man-made elements are extremely important. Like I mentioned, being a house, so where is your house? What is the neighboring area? How much of concrete, influence does your growing area have? What kind of a shadow and how long is that shadow? What kind of a sun area are you getting? The sunny area. Yeah, what is the access part to the growing area? How do you go to the growing area? Is it through the house? Is it a separate entry? Do you have to cross the road and go? What is the access path, so that you know how often and what all do you want to keep in mind while designing the garden. It's important to also know other elements around your growing area. Yeah, like if there could be a parking area or a play area for children, or you have a washing machine area outside, right? Most important is water resource. Where's the water coming in from? Where is it draining? Because ultimately, water, if it enters your space, it's gonna leave, right? Pollution. What kind of pollution is there, and whether it's in form of light pollution. I'm not going to talk about air pollution because it's there everywhere. But yes, light, chemical, it could be noise pollution. Yeah, can we do something about it while designing? So we can look at those elements. And some other elements that I've found important to look at when we are designing, especially something like an AC unit, which throws a lot of hot air during summer months. What kind of existing trees are there which you wouldn't want to cut and keep them, and plan around it. So these are some of the elements. Now, as we move forward in design, we'll be using these natural and man-made elements together to create a design. Yeah. Once you have these elements in place, you will come to know which part of your land has shade, which part of your land has sun, how long is that sun, which are the moist areas and dry areas. Most often you'll find that whatever is the lower lying area of the plot, that will remain moist because water will run from a high point to a low point. So that area will remain moist. Yes, and which is that's what I mean by the term gradient here. Gradient as in which direction is water flowing. So if you want to know if it's a small area, if you want to know which direction water is flowing, just throw a pail of water. Yeah, and the direction water flows is the direction your land is tilted or sloped, right? And then, of course, we can also take care of our good and bad view. When I say good and bad view, it would mean which part of the garden you want to specifically focus on to make it more beautiful. And we'll talk about these elements as we move forward. So these pictures here is basically, this was taken in April, where around 11 o'clock, where half of the land was already sunny. Not 11, I think it was 10 in the morning. It was already sunny, and by 12, it's absolutely sunny. The entire yard gets sun. And this is the same time in winter. I'm trying to show off the cauliflower that I've grown. But more importantly, I just want to say that at 10 or 11 in the morning, it's I think 11 or 12 in the morning, and there is no sun. So that's the kind of impact we're talking about when you talk about shady spots and sunny spots and how the sun is moving. Because ultimately, that's the main source of energy for our plants. Yeah. So when you have these elements with you, this is the kind of a checklist that you can keep in mind. It's not an exhaustive list, but it'll give you a sense of or a handle of things. How do you want to go ahead with it? Yeah. Keeping this checklist in mind, let's see how we would want to design it. Yeah. So this is your, these arcs that I've made is your summer arc, and assume that, let me give you a small brief. Assume that I am planning a winter garden, right? And I want vegetables, I want trees, I want salads because I love salads. I want some fruits. I want a sitting area, where I can sit and relax. And because I believe in permaculture, I also want a small composting unit where I can compost my garden waste and kitchen waste. And I would love to have more and more wildlife. So all of these elements I will try to bring into this design. Yeah, so when you see this summer arc on top, what I'm trying to showcase is that summer arc, and I've written 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. There is sun throughout this time through the entire property, and summer arc is on top because sun rises higher during summers and lights up everything. Yeah, and the winter arc is lower. Yeah, and so there is limited area where I get sunshine. This is the direction of the summer hot dry bins. Now the gray area that you see, this is the adjacent backyard that I have. There is a backyard right behind me on my right and my left. There is also a house here. Yeah, so these summer hot winds are coming from the northwest. This is my north. So it's coming from the northwest, but because of the sun, they don't hit my plot directly. So they take a turn and come in from the sides. Yeah, so there are hot winds coming from the sides, and there are also cool winter winds that are coming in. So clearly, these sides have a tendency to get more and more wind and more intensity. Yeah. Now, because I have my building, and during winters, this area is completely shaded. Yeah, it's completely shaded throughout the day. I don't get direct sunlight, like sun doesn't hit the shade, but yes, of course, there is indirect sunlight, yeah, because it's out there in the open. Now, street dog, we talked about wildlife animals. In urban landscapes, you'll not really find too many wildlife as such, but street dogs for sure you can find. And there's this street dog who tends to trespass my plot any time of the day. So I've marked that. Let's see how can we approach to remove that. This is the entry to my yard, yeah, and this is the tap, where this is the water source basically, and this is the drainage, and with that comes in, okay, yes, I have certain ficus trees growing on the side. These are again permanent structures, so to speak, and slope of the land, yeah, slope of the land going down like this. So now, because the slope is here, this area will be more damp and wet. Yeah, this will be more damp and wet. And this pretty much gives you an idea of the natural elements as well as the man-made elements. Now, let's move ahead and see how my requirements of vegetables, fruits, wildlife element, everything will get into place. So let's start off with doing some groundwork. When I say groundwork, let's say wherever we require any digging and structure, making certain structures on the ground before we start planting. So, oh, sorry. Yeah. So this is the 3 feet I've written. This is, let's say, the compost pit that I want to make to to put in my kitchen and garden waste. Now I'm mindful that we have monsoon in the month of July, August, and it's kind of a very flood kind of a situation in Gurgaon. We suddenly get too much rain and then no rain at all. And so it's very difficult for earth to absorb all of that. Most of the water, because there is no drainage, just rushes out through the roads onto other areas. So I just want to do some bit of water harvesting as well and utilize it in my garden. So what I've decided to do is, there is a drain pipe here. I'm going to attach an underground connection and use that in making of a pond right here. Now let me explain why a pond right in the middle. The summer sun is going to heat up the entire land because there is absolutely no shade. This pond, when it is full of water, is going to supply, this is the right spot here because it's going to make the surrounding area more and more pleasant, a little bit pleasant, right? Especially when during summers, this part of the plot is going to get heated. It usually gets heated up very highly. So I want to reduce that temperature as well. Now I also talked about that I want to sit in my yard and enjoy, just sit and relax for some time. So I want to create a sitting space here. Just to give you a reason, this is my entry point, and I don't want to meander all across the plot to go to a sitting spot. I just want to get out and walk in and just sit there. Yeah, so this is my designated sitting place. Now when I'm sitting here, if I look at the pond, it is going to give me that aesthetic sense, that calm and peacefulness that I was talking about. Because I want trees, I want fruits, I've decided to put in a lot of fruit trees in my garden. So I have decided to put a mango tree. It is an evergreen tree, and north, and it's capable of taking a lot of sun. So when the sun hits here during summers, mango wouldn't mind, and it's just fine. I decide to put guava and chiku here, and papaya, lemon, and pomegranate here. So just to give you a logic here, during winters, I will only get sunshine in this part of the land. So lemon and pomegranate are not very huge, they are shrubs. So they will not block too much of sunlight. Yeah. And papaya has a very tiny canopy. So it will not be blocking too much of sunlight again. Guava and chiku can be pruned. They will be pruned and during winters, so the sunlight will not again get stopped, and this I will still be able to use this place for my layering of my vegetables. Yeah, layering of the foods that I want to grow. Right now, when I have all of these in place, I'm just going to very basically put in certain access paths. Like these are my access paths to the various beds. And after that, these dots that you see, small colorful dots, are all the flowers that I decide to put. Now, just to give you a logic, while I walk towards the sitting space, I want the whole area to look beautiful, colorful, smell nice. So I have decided to put in flowers all across here. Now, sitting space, we were talking about good view. So when I enter my garden, the first thing that I see is right in front of me. So the sitting space here is going to again have a lot of flowers around. I've decided to put a bougainvillea bush here. Yeah, it's a shrub. It grows up high. It also has those thorns. So it should deter that street dog from jumping, because it used to jump in from here. It should deter that. So it's not only making that area beautiful, it also is stopping that dog. And it is also a nice haven for those little tailor birds that I get in my garden. Yeah, so it's an element that is delivering a lot of functions. So this area therefore becomes, that's how I've planned my flowers. Because I love salads, I want to grow salads. So this hexagonal kind of a shape is for lettuce and salad leaves. So I've decided to put in the salad leaves together with some flowers to manage the pests, manage smells. And there are these herbs so that I can just walk out of the door, pick the herbs like dhania, pudina, whatever I'm using, and go back in the kitchen and cook. So it's like easy access. I also love greens, so I've decided to put in some spinach, and I will of course layer it with more and more greens. But right now, just for ease of this design, I've kept it to only spinach and some herbs and more lettuce. Then I've decided to put in some methi. Methi does really well, and some garlic here, and again more garlic on these sides. The orange dots here that you see are basically mustard, and I would have mustard everywhere. Again, layering as much as possible. There is this papaya tree which forms the canopy, but not so big enough, so mustard plants will thrive here, and garlic should do well as well. Further, I've layered the top vegetable beds with cauliflower, garlic, and I'll add in some more tomatoes. Yeah, so again, tomato is a mid shrub, cauliflowers will occupy the ground, garlics will go down below underground. Then some radish, some carrots. Yeah, and I will add in more and more greens in spaces that you see. But however, just for the ease of design, you will see that my layers, this is not a complete vegetable planting design, I would say. It can be even more intensified. But for the ease of this presentation, I've kept it limited to these many layers so that you can at least see what kind of layering we are talking about. Yeah. So of course, there is a tree, there is a tomato plant, which is a mid layer, then there are underground layer, and then again a mid layer. All of these can happen, but it can be furthermore intensified. Yeah, the flowers have been chosen. Let's say, for example, here I wish to put a lot of marigolds. Here I wish to put some Raat Ki Rani. Yeah, and these so the smell, marigold is very, very good for repelling pests. Raat Ki Rani, again, very good for repelling pests. Your mustards attract a lot of bees. Cauliflower, I'll leave the cauliflower to flower and produce flowers and seeds for the next season so that more bees and more pollinators come in. So all of this planning is going to happen keeping in mind the key components we want to make our space more and more biodiverse. Yeah. So, and I understand that not everybody is growing on the ground, but I really want to leave you with a few pictures here. These are certain really biodiverse spots that I could find, on the internet, and which very clearly tells you that even, especially this picture, if I would like to, I just want to talk about it a little bit. That if you have a small thing, a balcony, let's say 6 feet by 4 feet, or even smaller than, if it's smaller than that, go ahead and plant a pot like this, have a mix of your greens. But if you have a balcony, layer it. Layer it in a manner like, for example, they've used this pot to plant a tomato. Yeah, they've used this area to grow lettuce. There is some more greens that I can see here. Similarly, you can do that. Instead of this pot being empty, you can actually utilize it to grow mint, or you can utilize it to even grow garlic, or you can utilize it to grow coriander. These greens can be super biodiverse. You can have spinach, you can have methi, add more flowers onto it, make it more and more biodiverse. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I really wanted to cover in this presentation. And yeah, we are kind of at the end of the workshop, so you will definitely receive a feedback form after this workshop, and once you fill in that feedback form, you will be able to get this PDF format of this presentation and be able to join the WhatsApp group as well. So yeah, so that's pretty much where it is. And yes, if you have any questions, please let me know. Great. So I do have some, I think Sangeeta ji, once you get my PDF, you'll be able to see some of the butterfly host plants. I've mentioned those. There is a thistle family that comes in that helps with butterflies. Yeah, and it attracts butterflies. And then there is star cluster and lantana that does it very well. I want to attract more birds. There are plenty of wasps to feed on. Sangeeta ji, try to get a fruiting tree. Try to get a fruiting tree like a mango, and like I mentioned, any fruiting tree should be able to get you birds. Yeah, and if you want, I'm not sure which bird you're trying to get in, but if you want like small birds like a sunbird or a tailor bird, you can get those flowering plants like I mentioned, canna and heliconia. They really attract those kind of birds. Monkeys and cats too. Monkeys are a difficult challenge. And monkeys are a challenge, and it has been a huge challenge. What I have seen, so everybody whoever has a farm, they there are different ways of doing it. Some people, and I know like my mentor Clea Chanmal has been just recently been trying to use a pepper spray. The pepper spray that you get, she sprays those pepper on the fruit. So she had these huge papaya trees, and she sprayed pepper spray on that, and that has deterred monkeys. So perhaps that will help. Yeah, cats. And if cats are coming into a garden, I think. See, I just want to touch upon one point here when we talk about pests appearing in our garden. Remember, we talked about the food chain. Yeah, there is a reason why a particular animal is coming into your garden. Let's try to understand, change your thought a little bit, and try to understand what is its next predator. Yeah, and what is it coming to predate on? I'm not saying that you enjoy that 100 cats entering your garden and you let them be. No. But if there are one or two cats, perhaps they're coming looking for mouse. Because I do have a sweet potato growing in my yard, and that has run, it's creeping all over about 15-20 feet. And that has invited, I believe that has invited some rats. And that's why I see two wild cats on my boundary wall various time of the day. So perhaps that's the reason why the cat is there. But yes, that I mean that if that helps your question in answering your question, Miss Shanti, then I'm glad. Dogs come and destroy all the vegetables. Yes, so people with dogs, I think thorny bushes have worked for me. And they are coming to destroy all the vegetables because they're not able to get food. And yes, they can be a nuisance, uh, but try to grow some thorny bushes that stop the dogs from entering the area, and maybe try and see if it's just a pathway for the dog, or is he coming to eat something from your garden, and try to deter it using some. You might as well have to use some mechanical methods to stop them. Okay, there are a lot of questions. Sorry. So I will take time to read in the questions, and I will try to answer as many as possible. Uh, what specific tips for terrace garden? Terrace garden, I think the logic of nature would remain the same. The soil, the vegetation, the layering, all of that. For terrace garden, treat it like a plot. The only thing that you will want to take care of, Vivek, is how heavy it's going to be, and can your terrace, if it becomes really heavy, then perhaps you might have to look at the mechanical aspect of it, of how to support it. But I don't think terrace garden should actually be you should think differently about it. uh, Wind can be one of the factors that is extremely important while managing a terrace garden, because the higher you go up, let's say you're on a 10th floor or high up, the winds are very strong. So you will definitely have to work on building some wind breaks. And I feel that bamboo is something that you can work on. Grow bamboo instead of installing one. So it could actually work as a wind hindrance. Yeah, Jitendra, I'm not sure about the termites, particularly in the lawn. There are various. I haven't tried it. I'm not sure in the sense that I haven't tried something that I can say for sure works. But again, I would urge you, go back and see why are termites there and what do they feed on? Is there something other than anteater that can eat those termites? I know that there are, if you get a lot of host of birds and butterflies, those birds should be eating those termites in all likelihood. But if not, then perhaps we'll have to look up for some more solutions and see how it goes. But again, look at the food chain. Look at how you want to manage the food chain for termites. Pragati, anything that can reduce pigeons? Sorry, Pragati, I don't really have a ready answer for pigeons, but in terms of, I think she's left. I think she's left the conversation, but I'll just move forward. Picture of huge language helps. Sorry, I didn't get that. Squirrels have almost become a pest. I think Vivek, again, we'll have to look at ways and perhaps mechanical ways of stopping the squirrels. If it has become a pest and if they're eating away everything, I would can't use pepper spray on butterflies. No, you can't use pepper spray on butterflies. I'm not sure why is that, but yeah, okay. Uh, Strawberries can be grown in Delhi if you have a very like what do you call it, an environment like a poly house sort of a thing. Then they can be grown, but yes, that will require a lot of energy and resources for you to grow the strawberries. So you'll have to weigh your options and see whether you want to put in that much of an effort. Okay, Bhavna, I love your question. How do we do gudai after mulching? You don't really need to do too much gudai. If you have weeds coming in, just pull them out. And because if there is so much of mulching, you will perhaps not need too much of gudai, but you can just do a little bit of digging. If you feel like digging, please dig and take first few inches of soil and let it just mix with the dry leaves. How about snails? Snails are definitely found in the damp areas, and I would encourage you not to kill them if they are not hampering too many of your plants. They definitely love to eat the green leafies, but snails are eaten by frogs. So if you're bringing in those snails, I mean, if the snails are there, I'm assuming frogs are going to be there. So they should be there, therefore taken care of. And if you're making a garden more biodiverse, birds should come and also eat them up. But if you really have a pest problem and snails are everywhere in your garden, you can actually pluck them out by hand and remove them. That is the most humane method that I know of. But again, see guys, I just want to again emphasize when I'm getting a lot of pest questions. When do you see a thing or an organism becomes a pest because the predator on top of that has left the food chain, and we that's what we are trying to achieve. Yeah, we are trying to achieve that kind of a system where the natural predator arrives. Yeah, so of course in the beginning you will definitely face an issues, and these things will not go away very quickly, but there are means and ways. So if you Sushil, if you invite more birds, snails should be taken care of. What kind of feed should we should keep for birds? Anya, I am not an ornithologist expert, but if you're doing a wildlife friendly garden and a biodiverse gardens, most of the birds can figure out their own food, and a lot of birds are insectivorous, so they go out and find their own insects that they feed on. If you have fruit trees, they will have a bite of your fruits and vegetables. So that is the natural way. Otherwise, I would encourage you to maybe do research and find those specific, if you want to keep out specific ingredients for birds. And I think they love small seeds. They love jowar, bajra is what I've heard. I don't feed the birds. The birds come and eat vegetables any time of the day. So that's helping. But they also eat a lot of bugs in my garden. A lot of these ladybird beetles and pumpkin beetles. All of those my birds are eating it. Uh, If I want to use plastic crates in the balcony, what do I line it with? If your plastic crates have big holes, I'm assuming, Mira, then you can line it with the burlap. So if you go to your vegetable market, and you find these boris, aloo ka boris, those are called burlaps. Just bring those burlaps, fit them in. They will have pores for sure, but I would want to use those because they are more eco-friendly and they decompose and become part of the soil. So that's what I would use. Sangeeta ji, bamboo adds to weight, but bamboo, it depends which kind of variety you're taking. Bamboo, you have thin bamboo, and you can really control how much of bamboo you want. But I've seen people growing papaya, I've seen people growing bananas, and I've seen people growing bamboo on the terrace. So I would still encourage you to give it a try. Pragati, when you're while harvesting a root vegetable, will it not hurt? No, it will not hurt, because when a root vegetable, if a root vegetable is next to another plant which is deep rooted, it will absolutely not, because root vegetable, after it's ready, it pushes itself up. Yeah, it starts showing itself up. So unless and until you're pulling it out and really harming rest of the plants, only then will it create some problem. But otherwise, just wait for them to be ripe enough and be at the right time, and you can pull them out without hurting. So just make sure when you are planting your plants that you are taking into consideration the height of it, and like the height of the plant, and what kind of space it will occupy. Yes, people asking for squirrels. Uh, there are two approaches to it. One, don't feed them anything. Two, they will figure out food on their own. But I've seen many people, and I think Shanti ji also has mentioned here. If you put aside like a food area for them with their nuts and whatever, they will come and eat and go. But again, you will have to manage it. Bhavna, I'm glad to know you have a lot of bees coming in. Please let them be. Please let them be, and be careful when you're going there. But unless until you don't disturb them, they don't really harm you. So please let them be. You have a free farm help, and they're helping you pollinate your plants. Yeah, so please let them be. And I will take one more question. Pooja, your question on the pot has limited nutrients. See, when you are putting in a lot of layering, yeah, the plant itself also produces nutrients. It's taking up nutrients from the soil, but there is interaction between root of a plant and that of a soil. So it's when you have multiple root systems, each of the root system is interacting with soil. So pot has limited nutrients. When you're replenishing it with compost and what do you call and some bit of it's going to fertilize it. So I'm assuming you have good compost and you're adding it onto your pot, and it will replenish the nutrients. Vivek, to keep weeds out, I have suggested using mulching. If they become a problem, you can still weed them out. But yes, if you're mulching, then you won't have too much of weeds to really bother and bother you that much. You when you're growing leafy vegetables, plant things that smell very strong. So it could be garlic, onion, dill. All these plants produce a lot of smell and they deter pests. Also, invite a lot of birds. So that's a leafy vegetable, Miss Sangeeta Bansal. Leafy vegetables are usually attacked by a lot of caterpillars, and these caterpillars are babies of moths, right? So if you invite a lot of birds into your garden, these will be taken care of in that sense. Pragati, layering of a water body is dependent. You can glay it. There is a method called glaying. Do look that up on the internet. You can choose to layer it, but it will not be the most, I would say, eco-friendly. But sure, you can make a decision on how it suits you. Thank you. Cool. Then, thank you guys. I think we are uh, towards the end of the presentation, and I think it's exact time for us to uh, conclude it. I just want to thank you all for taking out the time and being so patient throughout the presentation. And yeah, I do hope that I'll see you around perhaps in another webinar that we might soon conduct. But thanks a lot, and you've been a great audience. Yeah, thank you.